I can remember stories, those things my mother said. She told me fairy tales before I went to bed. She spoke of a happy ending. She spoke of a happy ending. She spoke of a happy ending.
Yeah, what might have. So my dad named my brother Curtis after Curtis Mayfield, and I was like, oh, okay. Well, I don't really want. I wouldn't want to, have another Curtis. So what would my name be? And I was thinking about it, and I was like, what kept going through my kind of going through me in this whole process was this kind of fantasy of having different parents, like having like a dad who's cool, who would be like, this is my son, even though I was his daughter. And so I was thinking about what would it be like to be able to be my dad's son, to be accepted as my dad's son without having to like have gender as an issue. You know what I mean? I'm still born as me, but like I get to be my dad's son because that's what I ended up being anyway. All the other ones, they didn't really help him the way I helped him. Like I would be the one in the basement. He was an electrician, and he would show me all of his notes and the formulas that he would use. He would talk to me about his work, but none of my other siblings, none of his sons, quote sons, were interested in that, and I was the only one really. And so, I had this fantasy of being the other son, like, and I was like, well, if I was the other son, he would just name me Mayfield, but it wouldn't even have to be a gendered thing. You know what I mean? And so, kind of like reimagining siblinghood or childhood as like a non-gendered. It was a non-gendered experience in a lot of ways for me anyway, being a kid who like didn't really feel comfortable in the whole girl category, or in any category really, but like with my family, like I had to do all of those girl things. Like I had to cook, So Mayfield came out like as real sneaky. Like it was just like Curtis Mayfield. I always loved the fact that my dad's favorite musician was Curtis Mayfield, and it was cool. And it was before him and my mom like. came into my room. No, it wasn't my room. So these calendars, these to-do lists, these lovely, lovely mementos of our lives, right? We write down these notes. I did this, I did that. Oh, so wonderful, so wonderful. So this son, that was not my, fuck the fatherland. The fathers, the sons, all of them. I'm done. Boys will not be boys. Turn them into something else. My father. So I wanted to be my father's son. But, you know, the fatherland, I mean, the founding fathers, you know, they drew a map like this. That's what they did. They drew a map. The founding fathers did that. They just drew a map called the Constitution. So they said, you know, they said the Constitution, the founding fathers said that the Constitution was like what was going to, fathers. Fathers are dead. Fathers, my father, you know. My grandfather, he said, he told me, he was from Trinidad, and I keep forgetting this to-do list, the laundry. You know, I forgot to do the laundry. I really need that one calendar. So Big Mama she had a garden. Big Mama had a garden. You know, I think she actually grew watermelon. I think that she did. And everybody went over to Big Mama's house. My father said that I could be his son. He actually was a court. Well, that's a lie. He didn't exactly be his son. I said, that was really not what happened. But the son that was not my father's son, you know, he really violated the expectation of privacy. I did not ask him. I did not even want him. So these founding fathers, oh, we worship them, don't we? Oh, I love, dun, 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 dun. Father, Father, there's so many of you cry. Father, 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 there's far too many of you. We got to find a way. We got to find a way. So my father's father was a junior. You know, why don't people who are not fathers get to be junior? There's no like Georgianne Brittany Jr. So, fucking ghost. I'm talking about the Holy Ghost. The Holy Ghost. The Holy Ghost. The Holy, 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 Holy,
to shame me, and still I'll care for you. You can run around, even put me down, still I'll be there for you. The world may think I'm foolish, they can't see you like I can. Oh, but anyone who knows what love is will understand. I just feel so sorry for the ones who pity me. 'Cause they just don't know. Oh, they don't know what happiness and love can be. I know to ever let you go, oh, is more than I could ever stand. Oh, but anyone who knows what love is will understand. Oh, they'll understand. If they try love, they'll understand. Oh, try and understand.
I'd like to introduce our speaker, Rizvana, if you'll come up and speak. And give us a response to this piece.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much, Jamil. So I was asked to give a sort of evocative sort of response to this piece, which I sort of think about as more of an experimental prose response and not a kind of programmatic, explication of what the performance is about. And it's in large part inspired by and draws upon what Jamil has written about his work. So, Movement Notes Part 1. What does it mean to notate movement, to think and write in time with movement, to write out movement, to write out of time about movement? I will try. Writing about movement demands writing without mediation. First, some questions. What does it mean to ask the performer to be open and ready to continually make and then remake movement in the moment of performance? Who, what is the performer? How to understand thought in relation to performance. How to understand choreographic thought. Thought in movement, movement in thought. Movement as thought. There is a difference, an infinitesimal difference and distance between these formulations. Is the performer's primary modality even movement? Is it thought, feeling, affect, energy, history, poetry, poetics, the archive, the written word? Jamil writes, how the body can accept new energy and where to place it. Throw everything into existential crisis, decompose the stage, decompose performance, decouple the performer from the performance, dismantle notions of authorship and intention. To speak of performance as a set of intensities, the intensification of certain ways of relating to the world or choosing not to relate to the world, an intensification or shielding oneself from the world that is also a hiding in the world, finding refuge there in the world's catastrophic folds. To dance or perform is to relate. Performance is about relationality. Performance, the one who shapeshifts, is about relating. A relating to and a retreating from the world. Those who dance and perform know the most difficult task is fugitive. How to move in excess of and in imminent relation to a world that conveniently forgets history, that is lost to ancestral time. How to arrange or comport oneself in the midst of the world's derangement. To hide oneself is to hold oneself. To hold onto oneself is to cloak oneself. When does one choose to camouflage and reveal the self? This is tactical. This is tactile. This is tactile survival. Not a survival strategy, but a moving and sensing toward the tactile dimensions of life lived at the sensuous limits of the world. The body swoops, swerves between song, hymn, and rhythm, costumed, extended, colored, dyed, adorned. This ephemeral haunting occasions an intertwining of memory, myth, and violence, a move toward the aesthetics of transformation. To hold on to color as a modality for living, to change one's color, to be chameleon-like, a becoming chameleon, a modulation of the heterosexual dyadic two into an as one that's as multiple and a more than one, an embrace without end. Chameleon, what is the chameleon but a poetic interlude between the animal and the human? Movement Notes Part 2. What constitutes a poetics of movement? Is this an event? Alain Badiou is a philosopher of the event. Events are always radically contingent. They take place at a particular locality, the evental site, and not across a situation, Badiou says. But I want to think about the event in a more minor scale, the minor grammar of the body's trace as an aesthetic event. When dance confronts poetry, when the dancer writes to the poet, who turns to the dancer, is the intertwining lyricism of written words with pen and page not in fact a dance the writer does with the hand, an extension and externalization of thought as the potentiated limit of writing? What is this duet between the writer and the performer? Jamil Kosoko suggests a duet with Curtis Mayfield that tracks the durational instability of the voice, construed as movement fabricated through costume, like an extended vocalization of oneself. Curtis Mayfield sings of a new world order, a brand new day, a change of mind for the human race. A new world order, a brand new day, a change of mind for the human race. Mother Earth's given birth to a brand new man, emphasis on man, father, brother. Frantz Fanon writes that man must put an end to the narcissism on which he relies in order to imagine that he is different from the other animals. This amounts to nothing more nor less than man's surrender. Having reflected on that, he writes, I grasp my narcissism with both hands, and I turn my back on the degradation of those who would make man a mere biological mechanism. And truly, what is to be done is to set man free. Chameleon, man, chameleon. I am interested in this oscillation, this blur, enacted in and through performance. I feel activated within this sensuous zone, this impossible interstice between the non-human and that which is imagined to be sublimely human. Costume opens up, or better yet, conjures some alternative space. Is the costume something the chameleon assumes, merely a material appendage, something one can attach and let go of at will? Or is it more radically a prosthetic extension of the body, a different material dimension that multiplies the notion of the human as more and less than animal? For the philosopher Kelly Oliver, philosophy reads humanity against animality. Man is man because he is separate from beast. We sacrifice animals to establish human kinship, but without the animal, the bonds of brotherhood fall apart. Either kinship with animals is possible, or kinship with humans is impossible. Philosophy holds that humans and animals are distinct, but in defending this position, the discipline of philosophy depends on a discourse that relies on the animal for its very definition of the human. The very domain we refer to as the ethical requires the animal. What does it mean to attach, detach, or remove objects from a given zone of encounter? Is this a practice of conjuring or conjuration, a practice of exploring the irreducible objecthood that we all are, as Fred Moten might say, in an attempt to move away from the overdetermined figuration of the human? Demetrius Udall writes that what has usually been identified as racism can be conceptualized in more comprehensive terms as the manner in which our particular genre of being human adaptably perceives, classifies, and categorizes our social world. This as the condition of instituting us as the specific mode of being human that we have come to live and embody. This order of becoming chameleon marks a transumption, a metaphorical transference of the ordered history of man, human, animal that breaks open the Aristotelian notion that man is the animal who is endowed with logos. Movement Notes Part 3. Jamil asks, what is magic, and what's needed in order for magic to exist and or to be real? A second duet, the processual imagination of memory, Afrodiasporic memory, transcribed in and as movement, movement's condition of possibility, the rhythmic acts of collecting, salvaging, preserving memory and culture, the traces of Afrodiasporic memory, the residue of African women in the fields, their daughters, granddaughters, a southern marching band, a drum line, a witch doctor's careful hands with salve. The imperative to conserve, reclaim, remain, to be vested in the cultural imaginary in this way is an ecological demand. These figures manifest a different ontology of presence. They disappear only to endure. The art historian Julia Bryan Wilson thinks about the moments in contemporary dance history where the body presents itself as a living archive, writing of postmodern dance traditions that actively created a living archive that existed alongside the many photographs, films, virtual reproductions, the Laban score, and written descriptions of performance. The body performing itself as a living archive of Afrodiasporic memory asks us to think about holding time in the body, about how all those bodies were holding time for future generations. This temporal holding might be understood as queer, precisely because of its transgenerational registration of life beyond an immediately given horizon. Wilson would have us think about the enactment of horizontal intimacy, a besideness that imagines an intimacy between ancestral time and our time, the besideness of the overworked, overbent bodies, stooping to gather and labor in the fields, and the time of Black joyfulness and celebration, the endless march of Black bodies in formation. Wilson gets besideness from queer theorist Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick, who described what she calls the beside as a realm of horizontal intimacy that is non-combative, porous, and open. This beside is not spatial, but theoretical. It delimits a space of critical openness. Rather than a space of opposition or even juxtaposition of distinct historical times, it designates a space of appositional possibility. Black joy, where does it come from? In the beside time of performance. The activation of fabric in the moments of performance makes this possible, organizes a world against normative time. Fred Moten says, blackness weaves social space like a garment. This chameleon-like body takes on loss as recuperative memory, wedged within the halfway time of the world. Movement Notes Part 4, on magic, or Black block parties. To ask after Black joy is to inquire into the magic of Black social dance circles, which is to say Black social life and its reproductive terrain. The gathering movements of women exhausted in the fields, the movement of Black drum circles and ring shouts are anti, with an E, A-N-T-E, anti-choreographic. They preceded what we call choreography. Choreography, Andre Lepecki tells us, is an apparatus of capture. Choreography captured the dancing body and removed it from its social terrain. Choreography names a very specific masculinist, fatherly, stately, judicial, theological, and disciplinary project, a project that moreover removed dance from its social terrain, the communal yard, and placed it in a private, courtly chamber. In a reading of Shakespeare's The Tempest, Denise Ferreira da Silva recognizes the kind of power reason displaces, magic as a productive strategy. The kind of knowledge that magic signifies, she writes, does not belong in Europe. She writes, if Caliban as a subject is a product of magic, the same productive power institutes Prospero as a master. Prospero as sovereign master can also be rendered one of Europe's many exilees. As De Silva writes, the astrologers, magicians, witch doctors, and those engaged in the deciphering of the signs of the world who were relegated into exile in the province of superstition by the end of the 17th century still remain of interest. At stake is the fundamental erasure or preservation of the irreducible magic of those who dance in the midst of the world's violent foreclosure of celebration's horizon. To be chameleon-like, to become like the chameleon, a transformative capacity that confronts the possibility of healing through music and dance. To close, Yusuf Kumunyaka from The Chameleon Couch. Ode to the chameleon, you are a glimpse of a rainbow, your eyes an iota of amber. If nature is mind, it knows you are always true, daring the human eye to see deeper. Thank you.
That was Rizvana Bradley, Assistant Professor of Film and Media Studies and African American Studies at Yale. At this point, we're going to do a quick Q&A. We're going to bring out some chairs, and our artists are going to come up and speak a little bit. And Andrew Kircher will lead them.
Yeah, so first, as we get the chairs set, thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was, yeah. I really want to leave a bit of space for them to talk to each other first, if that's all right, because one of the sort of tricks of the studio visit is that the artist and our guest respondent do discuss in advance what ways that they can connect, but then what actually will come from this partnership is not known until the evening of. And so I'm really excited to hear what you heard, Jamil, honestly. And I also am excited to hear what you saw and what you experienced in the performance. So would you join us? Thank you. And we need one more. I'll grab this. So I think I'll just actually ask that question again. What did you hear?
Oh my God. Kind of just need to marinate in that glory. That was your presentation. You know, so many just beautifully interwoven poetics and articulations that I've been thinking about, that we've been thinking about. So to kind of just see how that's been rendered inside of this framework, it's really, I mean, it takes, it's I'm still taking it in. Yeah, I'm taking it in. That's the best I can do right now.
And actually, can we take this moment for you two to introduce yourselves, and maybe there's something that you heard that stood out as well.
Mayfield Brooks. I don't know the poem at the end about the chameleon. Green eyes, yellow eyes. I don't know. There was amber eyes. I don't know, for some reason that image of the otherworldly eyes.
Jeremy Toussaint Baptiste. One thing that really, I think that intersected with some things that we've constantly been talking about over the course of a few years, but intensely over the last couple months working on this, embarking on this new process, is the value in staying slippery and what it is to adapt to a surrounding or structure or circumstance without necessarily taking on its character internally while reflecting its values and behaviors externally as a mode of survival, and the possibility and types of subterfuge which can happen like subdermally, I guess. So yeah, just like the value in shit staying slippery and difficult to capture, to marginalize bodies.
And I also just wanted to note, when you were talking about the becoming chameleon, I kept going back to the image of you two in your embrace and draped in the fabric. And I look forward to, when you go back into working on this piece, how much her writing will reverberate and sort of inform new gestures, certainly. Dr. Bradley, were there any things that you saw in the performance that surprised you or spoke to your own writing?
Yeah, I mean, well, I have a lot to say, so I should probably temper myself. I really liked what you said just now about the performance being interested in the ability to stay slippery, right? And as you said, like the types of subterfuge that can happen subdermally, because as we know within traditions of Afrodiasporic thought and theory, somebody like Frantz Fanon doesn't actually think that can happen, right? So for him, the black is simply reduced to his epidermis, right? But what he calls the epidermal schema, the skin. And so what I really like about the concept of the chameleon performance, as you sort of collectively rendered it, is making possible this subdermal subterfuge, right? As a kind of form of embodied fugitivity, right? That we haven't been able to kind of think about. Can I say two more things and be really annoying? Okay, let's be really annoying. Okay, so the other thing that I really enjoyed about your performance back there, right, was the sort of what we would kind of be tempted to. I mean, and this is something that I want to resist, right? But what we tempted to kind of identify as like hysterical stream of consciousness, right? But the way that, if I can still like insist that it is a form of hysterical stream of consciousness, is doing the work of psychoanalyzing and breaking up the patriarchal line, right? And the sort of like, you know, law of the father, Lacanian kind of, you know, imperative, right? That is supposed to structure, right? Filial relations universally. So I really like that stream of consciousness is a kind of a feminist, like hysterical, right, intervention into, right, the space of like public discourse, right, normative public discourse. I really like that. And then the last thing I'm going to say is I really liked the kind of, I mean, and you, one of you can maybe speak to this, but attaching the technology to the costume and the kind of staticky sound that we heard as you moved through the performance, I really think that that's an interesting way of rendering, you know, a form of technology that is supposed to be perfected, right, and making it subject to the kind of bodily contingencies of the, you know, of the Black performing body, right? So you're like basically breaking up the technology and making it a less perfected, you know, means of communication, and I really enjoyed that.
Or just rather amplifying this this.
What it is to, like, it's a very different thing for us to have a microphone here, and how that works like semiologically within the world of the performance as opposed to the thing being on you. And also coming from you. So it's still different from a lavalier mic, which is coming through these speakers. It's literally, or not, you know, not literally, but as close to the thing being of the body as possible. And in my years of working with technology, and you can speak to this because we've traveled to how many countries, and like the technology always perfect until a human gets in touch with it, right? So like, as much as those like awful eggheads in Silicon Valley want to take the human out of it and be incredibly Cajun in their pursuit of this thing, like as soon as we touch it, it's a mess and it's beautiful. Like that's the best part of it is the muck of it, and I think that like Mayfield working with that feedback and the crackle is like this like really special intersection of human and body or human and technology creating something that neither can do on their own.
Yeah, and just to sort of talk on that a little bit, I mean, I'm fascinated by failure and the possibility of failure and what can come and be manifest as a result thereof. The possibility, the recovery, you know, and so any opportunities that present themselves inside of the performative action, you know, I'm constantly thinking, okay, well, this is a clear chance to really screw something up. Let's lean into it, you know. Like I find that's the most exciting part to me. I don't know what that is, or I'm still sort of making sense as to what my attraction is to failure, but I know there's something about the metaphor of blackness and how it relates to failure as well as a kind of concept that I'm always sort of just leaning into and trying to just extract a little bit more, you know.
Thank you. Every time you write something down, I go, what's she? I kind of want to know. Is there something?
Oh, I just don't want to forget what they're saying, and I want to, like, you know, honor their phrasing and everything. But Jamil, what you just said about the relationship between blackness and failure is also something that I think deserves to be written about more and theorized more, because as we know, there's been a kind of tendency to think more directly about queerness and failure in relation to the performative, right? But not necessarily blackness and failure, right? And you know, I that's something that just your comment prompted me to think about.
And that's that. I feel like that leans more into that slippery ideal, because as someone who identifies and sort of situates inside of both of these terrains, inside of a multiplicity of terrains, to be completely honest. I feel like there's this embodied concept of failure that I'm always sort of reckoning with, You know, no, yeah, not to toot my own horn, but
Go
you
ahead.
know, to be well, no, I mean not to do that, but I'm thinking about the amount of failure that exists in the American project at the moment, and sort of what my sort of proximity is to it, and the number of structures, invisible but also very visible, that allow me to exist in a way where I can be in this room and I can engage in this conversation and we can theorize over these concepts in a way that clearly we've we've had to achieve a certain amount of distance from the thing to be able to in fact articulate some other reckoning of it or conjure some other possibility around it. And so that's just a framework that I mean that's an internal sort of system that's at play, but it's a motivator inside of my creative work. And it's something that I'm always sort of thinking about and bringing in the room in various ways, whether it be, you know, a excerpt from Ike and Tina, or you know, a section of the Cosby Show, or whatever. You know, it's just like I'm so curious about that. It's just, it feels really, yeah, really hot to me right now.
Also, working with you in relation to that with costuming has been a real kind of learning curve.
I really would like to hear you, dear. Can you speak up?
Oh, sure.
I think it's really loud enough. I think it's a good sound level. But go on.
Okay. Anyway, about in relation to failure and your working with costume and fabric and objects within the Chameleon, I felt like I went through a learning curve as a performer to, you know, like throw the belt on the head and the shoe on the head and the, you know, and if it falls, and then the, you know, everything can become something else as part of the disintegration or the kind of creation of that costume.
Well, it's all transformative, you know, and it depends on our proximity as living bodies to the object. So, and I'm really curious about the materialization of the mess, of the unknown. And so this work, I'm really trying to articulate it inside of these, you know, this material as a way to sort of magnify some of the unseen, some of the hidden structures that are at play that are very much a force that we're trying to maneuver, you know, with and through.
Well, I'd love to turn out to y'all now if there are any questions that you have. Now, I do want to lean on the word question because the most generous thing we can do is ask questions of the group so that everyone benefits from the answer. If you have thoughts about the performance or if you are an artist and you want to talk about your work, that's what the lobby's for. So right now, it's really just about questions, things that you want to bring out into the room. Yes, please.
This feels funny because I know you three and I'm like 2 yards from you. Hi. So my question is around the voice. I was really interested in how when Mayfield was having this like monologue that sort of placed them in this liminal space between this like kind of ancestral discomfort around fatherhood and the son who never was, and this current like fuck my calendar, what do I do with my calendar, and like this sense of like I don't know, like the plate tectonics of time like shifting and trying to figure out how to be in a present or a past or a future all at the same time. And it really like it was making me think about how the voice functioned in relation to that, like existing in that kind of space, and just wondering how you guys have been working with speaking in the work otherwise, or if there's like stuff happening around that. And then of course that also in relation to the larger sort of sonic texture that Jeremy's developing. So it's kind of a general question around the voice and sound.
That's beautiful. You know, we talk a lot. We do. I mean, there are rehearsals where literally we just sit and talk, We're planning our reading group, this winter. And I mean, we're really a very like nerdy bunch of people. So, so we talk a lot. And I think that for me, it helps this idea of the voice, the sonic. It feels so integral as again another kind of material, that is sort of amplifying this unknown, this space, and sort of and Jeremy sort of, articulating that or seeming to sort of lead us through, navigate us through what this possibility might be, which is always unfolding, and thank God. I mean, he's been such a trooper, because I never do anything the same way twice, but he's is just there, and even quote unquote set things are still always sort of changing a little bit. So the sails are always moving. So, but I imagine you might have a lot more to say about that, or maybe not.
Jamil and Mayfield, I think in a few rehearsals, were speaking at length about this notion of the external, internal, and internal. And of course, performativity has a huge role in how those things manifest or don't manifest over the course of viewing a work or showing a work. But also, for me, how voice is handled in terms of like directness or some sort of manipulation, where it's still, the language is still given primacy, turning the language into material or turning it into full-on texture. Sort of like, it's like just a thing that we work to mess around with in the studio and in the process. In the moment y'all saw tonight, I think that sort of like external, internal line is a bit more explicit than it may show up in like past works or in further moments during this work. And yeah, I don't know, there's really something exciting about working with spoken voice that is in response and also like riffing on the same, like something that is being played through the main speakers. And yeah, there's not a lot of like magic that happens, or there's not a lot of stuff that I'm doing beyond just like letting the power of the two things speak for themselves.
Yeah, and I have the backup of this kind of, story, that you recorded. And then, Jeremy kind of brought in the piano today, and that was really special for me, with my voice being able to be like a part of that music. And so working, vocally with like the analog and the digital, the analog and the not analog was really kind of dynamic for me as a, performer.
Can you speak to like having it become music, or having what you were doing there become music too? Because that's really interesting.
Yeah, I've been preparing, even if we're not rehearsing, like I'll watch people and I'll listen to people who are specifically in different states, especially on the subway and on the street. And it started to become like music. And so I feel like that was something that I was working on for this piece. And when the piano came in, it just gave it more of a length, you know what I mean? Or an extension. And that was something that I really appreciated and worked with my voice. So it was really just in the moment. But I had also been like listening, to different songs and thinking about the songs. And Marvin Gaye plays piano, and I had been listening to Marvin Gaye, you know, and Nina Simone plays the piano. And so the piano is something that is so embedded, I think, in the voice and in, you know, the Black tradition.
Can I ask what the future for this project is, as much as you can project right now?
There's a lot of ways to answer that question, I guess. I mean, I leave Monday for Sweden, and we're gonna continue to work there. And then, you know, then we go to LA. I mean, I don't know what you're asking. We're gonna continue. Like, you know, there's a number of residencies that we have that we're just gonna continue to push the thing forward. You know.
Is it a piece that you think will have a definitive moment where this is a single composition, or is it more a larger project that you might iterate upon?
No, I mean, the whole concept of Chameleon is something it's ever shifting, it's ever changing, it's ever sort of repositioning itself and adapting to other structures, institutions, systems, whatever. So the contours are ever, you know, being expounded upon, I guess. But I do think there will come a time when we've investigated this thing enough and we know it. That'll be well after it premieres. But I think the way in which I'm most interested in working is a kind of process that is ever expanding, ever teaching us. Yeah, but it will have a shape that will change. That probably does not answer your question.
No, it totally does. And I would say it has a beautiful shape now.
Okay,
So
right.
I just, more, because I'd imagine there are other people like me who look forward to seeing the project as it continues to develop and take different shapes. So thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I'm a dancer, lifelong dancer, so, but I've worked in film and theater. So I think, though, and correct me if you disagree, that for a dancer, context changes things. So being that you're working in 4 dimensions, but also scale and perspective changes what happens. We saw this almost as a theater in the round situation. So it's the nature of the Segal that happens, but without that limit. Do you see this continuing in that format, or would it be proscenium stage, or what would be the context, the ideal context for your piece?
Thank you.
I don't know yet. I don't know yet. I mean, you know, it'll be a film. There's a film project embedded in there. There's a writing project embedded in there. An installation component. So it's exactly, yeah.
Maybe it has the malleability to expand and contract based on where. Which institution has decided to bring us along for the ride, and how you've decided to situate it within the institution itself.
Well, I can think of no better way to end Prelude than to have a performance and a conversation like this. Prelude exists to celebrate and hold up the downtown experimental theater and to bring it into conversation with itself, but also it's really importantly cited here at the Segal Center, at the Graduate Center, which is a celebrated and important public institution for critical discourse. And so to take these artists who are able to speak so openly and honestly about their work at this moment and where it goes, and to have such a distinguished and wonderfully poetical guest, it really satisfies everything I would have dreamed Prelude would be. I hope you've had a wonderful festival as I did, and I want to thank all of our guests right now for this evening. Thank you so much.